It began with a dream of speed and ended in the defense of a kingdom. Witness the complete evolution of the company that gave the world its most beautiful and deadly fighters. We start our list with flying boats, amphibians, and seaplanes. AD Flying Boat. Going back to the Great War, the Air Department actually designed this sturdy biplane. It primarily handled maritime patrols, but more importantly, it proved just how useful water-based aviation could be. AD Navy Plane. Designed as a nimble reconnaissance craft for the high seas, this model is quite interesting. It really highlighted the military transition from purely experimental concepts into genuinely practical naval observation tools. Now this is the Supermarine Baby. This is actually one of the smallest fighter flying boats ever built. Surprisingly agile for its tiny size, it really pushed the boundaries of what a single-seat seacraft could practically achieve. Then, Supermarine Channel, after the First World War, they cleverly converted this wartime surplus for civilian life. Honestly, it was a major stepping stone that paved the way for commercial air travel across the water. Supermarine Commercial Amphibian. This purpose-built machine was specifically designed to bridge the gap between land and sea. It gave people a fascinating glimpse into a future where transport was not completely restricted by standard runways. Supermarine Sea King. Acting as a refined evolution of earlier models, this fighter featured a notably sleek hull. It ended up being a crucial stepping stone toward developing much more advanced racing and military aircraft. Then, Supermarine Sea Lion. Built strictly for speed, this champion of the waves completely dominated the sky. It famously took home the prestigious Schneider trophy back in 1922, cementing its legacy in early aviation history. Then, Supermarine Seagull. This highly adaptable amphibian was primarily used for spotting and reconnaissance. Its rugged biplane wings basically allowed pilots to safely operate straight from a ship deck or out on the open ocean. Up next, Supermarine Seal. Designed specifically for the fleet, this carrier-borne spotter became a vital eye for the Navy. Carrying a 3-person crew, it handled the incredibly rough conditions of standard maritime service with absolute ease. Supermarine Sea Eagle. Looking at early passenger travel, this elegant craft was a true pioneer. Ferrying people directly across the English Channel, it actually made over-water commuting a very comfortable, highly practical daily reality. Then, Supermarine Scarab. What we have here is a militarized version of an earlier civil design. They exported it to Spain, where it served as a highly versatile bomber and reliable reconnaissance tool for naval forces. Supermarine Swan. Marking a major shift toward larger designs, this powerful twin-engine amphibian was incredibly important. It served as the vital prototype that ultimately led to those incredibly famous long-range flying boats later on. Supermarine Southampton. This one was just a massive success for the company, becoming highly famous during the interwar period. This flying boat was widely known for completing some incredibly demanding long-distance formation flights. Supermarine Nanook. Originally built for the Danish Navy, this 3-engine flying boat featured a sleek profile. Despite facing some initial technical hurdles, it definitely paved the way for more reliable, long-distance maritime aircraft designs. Now this is the Supermarine Seamew. Intended to operate straight from aircraft carriers, this twin-engine amphibian was actually remarkably compact. Even with its smaller size, it still brought the company's incredibly high design standards into the naval aviation sector. Supermarine Air Yacht. Imagine a flying hotel room with wings. Built for a wealthy private owner wanting to travel the globe in style, this massive vessel proved that pure luxury could successfully meet the open ocean. Supermarine Scapper. This plane represented a significant leap forward in reconnaissance tech. By bridging the gap between older biplanes and modern designs, it provided excellent endurance for those grueling, long patrols over the North Sea. Supermarine Stranraer, famous for its distinctive sound. This long-range reconnaissance craft was a true 1930s workhorse. With a remarkably rugged build, it served very bravely throughout the early, difficult years of the Second World War. Up next, Supermarine Walrus. It honestly looked a bit awkward on the ground, but this beloved amphibian was an absolute lifesaver in the water. Countless downed pilots owed their survival to its incredibly reliable air-sea rescue capabilities. Supermarine Sea Otter. Acting as a refined successor to a legendary design, this model switched to a tractor engine layout. It gained much better handling, proving that smart engineering could easily improve an already classic aircraft. Supermarine Seagull. Looking at post-war designs, this one featured a highly unique variable incidence wing. This clever setup allowed incredibly short takeoffs and landings, basically representing the final peak of the military flying boat era. Let's move on to fighters, piston-engined. Supermarine Type 224. While those cranked wings certainly looked striking, this fighter prototype missed the mark slightly. However, it was an incredibly crucial learning experience, showing the design team exactly what to tweak for future success. Supermarine Spitfire. Easily the most iconic aircraft in British history. With its beautiful elliptical wings and responsive power, it became a national symbol of hope while offering pilots unmatched, nimble agility during intense wartime dogfights. Up next, Supermarine Seafire. Taking the famous fighter to the ocean, this carrier-based version maintained all its original grace. Though landing on a moving deck with narrow gear was tough, it proudly served the Navy worldwide. Supermarine Spiteful. Built to replace an absolute legend, this machine introduced a brand new laminar flow wing. It was astonishingly fast in level flight, but the emerging jet age sadly cut its promising development short. Supermarine Seafang. Built to be the ultimate piston-engine interceptor, this naval fighter looked like an absolute beast with its massive contra-rotating propellers. Sadly, very few were actually completed as jet power quickly took over. Next on the list is Schneider Trophy and Racing Aircraft. Supermarine Sparrow. Showing a completely different side of the company, this charming two-seater biplane was purely meant for sport and training. Being nimble and easy to fly made it absolutely perfect for budding young pilots. Supermarine S4. Departing wildly from traditional biplane races, this sleek monoplane was exceptionally fast but noticeably temperamental. Still, it was a remarkably brave experiment that taught the engineering team how to manage extreme flight speeds. Supermarine S5. Bringing home the gold at the Schneider Trophy, this refined racer was a game-changer. Its streamlined profile and powerful engine definitively proved that monoplanes were the absolute future of high-speed flight. Supermarine S6. Pushing racing technology to the absolute limit, this magnificent machine was a true masterpiece of metal and power. The tough lessons learned here eventually led to the most famous British fighter in history. Next up, jet fighters and swept-wing experimental aircraft. Supermarine Attacker. Stepping into the jet age, this was the very first operational jet for the Royal Navy. Using an unusual tail dragger configuration, it clearly signaled that carrier aviation was entering a much faster generation. Supermarine Type 510. As a fascinating experimental craft, this plane added swept wings to an early jet fuselage. It critically helped engineers understand supersonic flight behavior, acting as a mandatory stepping stone for much faster designs. Supermarine Type 525. Designed specifically to test the absolute limits of naval power, this large twin-engine machine was incredibly heavy. Its successful test trials smoothly paved the way for those massive strike fighters of the 50s. Supermarine Type 535. Looking much more like a finished frontline fighter, this sleek jet wisely introduced nose-wheel landing gear. That simple change made carrier takeoffs much safer, perfectly bridging the gap between prototypes and active service. Then, Supermarine Swift, briefly holding the absolute airspeed record. This interceptor was blindingly fast in a straight line. Though it admittedly struggled with high-altitude handling, it remains a striking, fascinating example of early Cold War engineering. Supermarine Scimitar. This complex, powerful, twin-engine strike fighter was an absolute beast at low altitudes. Capable of carrying incredibly heavy weapons at high speeds, it realistically demanded a ton of skill from pilots and ground crews. Ending with bombers and experimental prototypes. Supermarine Giant. This highly ambitious project envisioned a massive four-engine bomber capable of carrying heavy loads over huge distances. Although it never left the drawing board, it would have been an absolute giant of its era. Supermarine Type 316. Entering a heavy bomber competition, this bold design featured a highly specialized, efficient wing. Tragically, A wartime factory bombing completely destroyed the prototype, permanently ending its chances of ever reaching the actual production line. Supermarine Type 322, featuring a highly unusual wing that could actually change angles mid-flight. This quirky plane managed incredibly short takeoffs. While it looked a bit awkward, that brilliant underlying technology was genuinely ahead of its time. Now this is the Supermarine Type 545. Meant to be a supersonic evolution, this jet featured a pointed nose and ultra-thin wings for breaking the sound barrier. Unfortunately, the entire project was abruptly cancelled right before it could actually take flight.